Thank you, Premier Dexter, and let me too welcome all of you to the 23rd Annual Public Policy Forum dinner. As the many of you who are repeat participants to this event know, the forum has a tradition of having premiers act as co-host of the annual dinner, and it's a particular pleasure for me to have Premier Dexter as my partner for two reasons. The first is that there is one thread that is common to all the political junkies in this room, regardless of where they hail from, and it is a taste for fresh faces. Sometimes it could actually be described as a fatal attraction. And as a first-time premier, and also the first New Democrat to run a province in Atlantic Canada, Premier Dexter is a novelty onto the political landscape in more than one way. But there's another less political reason why I'm glad to have him as a partner. You know, we refresh the premier's list in this country fairly regularly. Sadly, the same thing can't be said about the list of pundits and media personalities. And that means that you get me, and that is the equivalent of asking a one-woman band to run an orchestra. So if you want those trains to run on time, please rely on the Premier. Apparently that is also part of his job up in Nova Scotia. Now, to make my task easier, the forum offered me a draft keynote speech. And I have to say that it read rather well, and it dealt with a timely topic, the democratic deficit. But I figured if I was going to get in trouble on that topic or any other, I should do so on my own behalf. So anything I say after this is not part of the notes that they gave me. On the democratic deficit, I have to tell you that sometimes when we look at polls these days, my colleagues like to write that it's Groundhog Day in Ottawa. But when I hear discussion of the democratic deficit and the dysfunction of our political system, I'm reminded of a movie that was called The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And for those who haven't seen it, it was a quite marvelous movie about a couple. One part of the couple forgot instantly what had happened before, and they were always starting from scratch, as if they had no past. So for the record, I believe that some of our current dysfunctions stem from our abysmal collective failure to modernize our institutions in the 3 decades, count them, 3 decades since we patriated the Constitution. Remember, we were bringing it back from Great Britain so that we could modernize our own institutions. The Bloc Québécois certainly is the most visible consequence of having failed to formally bring Quebec into the constitutional loop. And on a larger note, it's awfully hard to run a 21st century country on 19th century institutions, and it's not going to be getting any easier. But with tonight's honorees in mind, I have to tell you that I really wanted to talk about another kind of deficit. Preston Manning, Carol Taylor, and Phil Fontaine hail from very different corners of the public policy world. But they have one trait in common, and it is what we call in French, le courage de leurs convictions, the courage of their convictions. I'm convinced that Tony Dean, who served under 2 strikingly different premiers, would agree with me that to have a vibrant democratic life, one needs to have participants outside, but also inside politics, who have the political will to bring big ideas to the fore, and who have enough faith in those ideas to risk challenging conventional wisdom, and sometimes, yes, lose elections. For without the shock of ideas and contrary visions, there can be no real policy spark, and certainly no meaningful debate. A deficit of political will cannot be solved by solving a democratic deficit. An empty box remains empty, even if you change its contour or its wrapping. And in closing, I would like to close with an anecdote. It's not an anecdote that I have heard firsthand, but secondhand, as it was told by Lucien Bouchard to his caucus on the day when he told his MPs that he was leaving the Bloc Québécois to become Premier of Quebec. At the time, remember that sovereignty was awfully close to the 50% mark, and most people expected that there would be a rematch, and that Premier Bouchard, who was then the leader of the Bloc Québécois, would be a key character in that battle to win a decisive mandate. At the time, many observers and some of his own MPs questioned the wisdom of abandoning his Ottawa niche for the rough and tumble of the National Assembly. As Gilles Duceppe has demonstrated since then, it is very difficult to go wrong when one is the leader of a perpetual opposition party that never has to take an unpopular decision. So in response to the concern that he would lose his shrine in Quebec City, Bouchard told his MPs of being a young boy and making the football team for the first time and putting on his brand new uniform for his very first game. His mother, he said, came upon him as he was admiring himself, as young men will do, and the uniform in the mirror. And she looked at him and the mirror and the brand new uniform. She said that if he came home from the game with his uniform in the same perfect shape, she would be ashamed of him. She added that he would be judged on whether he deserved the uniform by the wear and tear that it would incur during the game. Now, I never met Lucien Bouchard's mother, and I'm told she was a rather formidable woman. But I'm certain of one thing, and it is that what she had in mind when she encouraged her son to jump into the fray, regardless of the consequences to his uniform, was not the kind of dirt that comes from participating in mud-throwing matches. Ladies and gentlemen, since 1987, the Public Policy Forum has honored leaders who have left their mark on government and public policy in Canada by scoring touchdowns on the front of ideas. C'est certainement quelque chose à célébrer. C'est donc avec un grand plaisir que je participe à cette soirée où des honneurs tant mérités sont au programme. Merci. Thank you very much.